Making whiskey is part science, part art, and part magic. Hello everyone, welcome to Read the Right Thing Book Reviews. I'm Eric, thanks so much for watching. Today I have my Augusta National hat on because I'm reviewing a writer from the South. This hat was a gift from a friend who attended the tournament this year. Wright Thompson is a senior writer at ESPN. He's written about a wide range of sports. You should definitely check out his essay called Holy Ground, which is about the Masters Golf Tournament, Augusta National Golf Course, and the relationship between fathers and sons. If you're a whiskey drinker, you've probably heard of the brand Pappy Van Winkle. But even if you're not a drinker, you may have heard about the brand through pop culture. The brand and whiskey is cloaked in mythology. Is it really worth the price? Is the taste that good? Or is this drink extremely overrated and just a product of good advertising? PAPPYLAND is about a family that's in the whiskey business and what it takes to make the finest bourbon in the world. But it's also about Southern culture and the relationship between fathers and sons. The story has a few main threads. The first thread is the story of Julian Van Winkle, who is the great-grandson of Pappy. Julian's grandpa, Pappy, started a successful whiskey business when the country was crazy about whiskey. However, Julian's father was forced to sell their distillery when that craze died down. Julian inherited a failing business and fought to reinvent the Pappy Van Winkle brand. He fought to do this through tough times when Americans weren't interested in whiskey anymore. Through a stroke of luck, barrels of the original Pappy Van Winkle whiskey were found, and he was able to purchase those to save his family business. But whiskey inevitably runs out. Now Julian is crafting his own whiskey, and he's waiting to see if it will live up to the brand name. Thompson writes about Julian's redemption story almost as a fan or a friend cheering him on. But he also writes about so much more than that. He writes about the whiskey itself. There's so much that goes into the making of whiskey. There's distilleries, barrels, and the process by which you do it. Making whiskey is part science, part art, and part magic. Thompson shows us how it's made, why the spirit caught on, and why it went through a time where it wasn't very popular in America, and also why it's recently boomed again. But more than that, he writes about whiskey's power to transcend time and place. When you pop open a bottle of whiskey, you're really tasting the past. It is savored and revered for the most special moments and the most special people. And make no mistake, it's still alcohol. It can easily ruin your life, or it can greatly enhance it. The other important thread is the author's own story of becoming a father while reconciling his own relationship with his deceased father. I loved all the different threads in this book and how they weave together to form a common story. I'm also extremely interested in craft and how businesses are run. The author also gives his opinion on what it means to be a Southerner, the responsibility of carrying a heritage, and what it means to belong to a family. He discusses what it is to be a Southerner in general, but more specifically, he talks about the state of Kentucky. There are even a few pages dedicating to horse racing and horse breeding. Here's a part in the book where he's talking about Kentucky and how Kentucky is really at the center for the Van Winkle family. Kentucky is at the center of the Van Winkle family mythology. And in the days before I met Julian at Churchill Downs, I drove around the horse farms and pastures of East Louisville. It's impossible to separate Julian from his home state. It's no coincidence that Bourbon and thoroughbred racehorses come from the same place because both are made or broken long before anyone ever sees them. I rolled down the windows and let the big engine on my car roar and growl as I made the kind of aimless country laps that define my high school summer days. Exploring this part of Kentucky is one of my favorite drives in the world, following State Highway 1967 and Ironworks Pike, turning on narrow lanes built alongside short stone walls. Above me stretched a canopy of green leaves. The sun coming through the branches landed on the blacktop in dappled patches of light. My purpose wasn't completely aimless, though. I'd driven here, over hill and dell, with a mission: to find the ruins of an old mansion, hidden from the road by pastures and oaks, which I've had described to me in such fanciful terms that I don't fully believe anything that dramatic could really be standing. A local horse lover told me which unmarked iron gate to approach, and when my car got close, the gate opened. The land is now owned by one of those powerful families who've long come and gone from the world of thoroughbred racing. This one made its money in the life insurance game. I'm a middle-aged man with elevated liver enzymes and high cholesterol, so I've had to consider dying as a real thing. And I find my immediate reaction is this strange desire to leave behind monuments to myself, whether they come in the form of a book about bourbon or in letters to friends and family. The monuments we erect, shouting into the wind that we were once alive and had hopes and dreams, often end up becoming a shrine to the fallacy and futility of that desire itself. So as you can see, Wright Thompson, he has a really reflective style. He thinks about life, he thinks about death, he thinks about what does he want to leave behind. And that's really what this book is all about. What do we want to leave behind? I would say the main question that is posed in this book is, what do we owe our fathers? What do we owe our ancestors? And while he's discussing this, he even writes a little bit about Bruce Springsteen's music, which I always greatly appreciate. Wright spent many days and many nights driving around Kentucky with Julian and his family to give us the inside story of this family and their business. It's an interesting story even if you don't like whiskey. If I had any dislikes in this book, it would be that it is clear that the author is really a fan and friend of Julian. So with that, inherently, you have to ask yourself the question of, is he treating this subject fairly? There needs to be a relationship between the author and the subject, one of respect, but as a reader, I want to know that the author is telling us the whole story, the 100% truth, give us the good and the bad, warts and all. And Thompson does mention the negative things that people say about Julian and the Pappy Van Winkle brand, but it's clear the author doesn't think these things. There are also quite a few topics, which wasn't really a dislike for me, but some readers may be turned off on that. It can maybe get a little bit rambly, and it loses its train of thought. If you're picking up this book, you probably want to read about whiskey, and you might be thinking, why is he talking about horses? So that wasn't necessarily a dislike for me, but it could be for some readers. More than anything, it is a quick and enjoyable read, and one that will have you reflecting on your own relationship with your parents and family members. It is the type of reflective nonfiction that I really like. Not just a recounting of events, but posing of questions and an attempt to deliver a response. How do you make the finest bourbon in the world? And how do you make something that lasts, that stands out? Whether it's bourbon, a business, or family relationships and values. Part history book and part memoir, this book was definitely the right thing for me. Wright Thompson unveils a mythological cloak to reveal a hardworking son, a heritage, and a bourbon that stands the test of time. If you like whiskey, if you like business, or anything Southern, then you should for sure check out this book. That was my review of PAPPYLAND by Wright Thompson. If you read this book, let me know what you thought about it in the comments. Or if you know someone who's read this book or is interested in this book, please send this video to them if you think they might find it helpful. That would greatly help me, and I'd be glad that they would get to see it. Once again, thanks for tuning in, and as always, read the right thing.